Ladies and gentlemen, this is my first ever Disney Lorcana video, the definitive meta report for set 2. We're halfway through the set. We've got a really good idea over what the best decks in the game are. My name's Specimen. I've got a background in Marvel Snap and Gwent, where I was recently an analyst in the World Champions, which happened in December for Gwent. I've also recently been commentating some Disney Lorcana with Tia Beastie, who's been doing the biggest online Lorcana tournaments. I'm really into this game. I love the deck building side of it in particular. So let's do a meta report. The first deck is one of mine. It's Aggro. Deserves a mention. It's a lot weaker than the other 4 decks we're going to be looking at, but this deck just does not lose unless your opponent is playing Steel. That's pretty much it. Steel dominates this deck with cards like Tinkerbell Giant Fairy dealing 1 to everything. Grab Your Sword is a real problem for this deck. However, if your opponent doesn't have access to those kinds of cards, this deck is just almost impossible to deal with. That is because of the bounce package with Madam Mim Snake and Madam Mim Fox. You can quest with things like Lilo and Maleficent and then bounce them back into your hand and replay them, being able to quest again, of course, because only unreadied cards can be challenged. So if they don't have those Tinkerbells, this deck really just runs away with it. Arthur, also just an incredibly powerful bounce card. We've still got Simba in here. One thing to bear in mind is Pascal, if you're going second, is pretty much the best 1-drop to play every single time in the game, because you just play a 2-drop on turn 2 and your Pascal's able to quest no matter what your opponent played. We've also got Merlin Goat as well as Merlin Rabbit for that little bit of card draw. Maleficent and friends on the other side with Rapunzel for some card draw. And a big shout out to Pan Shadow. This deck, you do not want to go above 4 ink. You just stay at 4 ink. You very rarely go above. Perhaps if your opponent plays a whole new world, or you think that you're just a turn away from victory and you've got, for example, a Lilo and a Merlin's Goat in hand, and you just want to ink a card to get that Lilo down a turn sooner, that's the only time you should really ever consider going above 4 ink in your Inkwell with this one. Really powerful deck. Again, unfortunately, the matchups with it feel quite binary, and therefore I don't think it's the most popular one for people to play, particularly top players who are going to want more agency, but do not sleep on this deck. It's a banger. Also, if you want to make it super budget friendly, the Rapunzel is absolutely not necessary and can be replaced by a card of your choice. Befuddle is going to be the one that is most likely your go-to card. A lot of people are going to be surprised Befuddle isn't in this deck. It's an overrated card. Not really needed in my opinion now that you've got the Madam Mims to bounce stuff back to your own hand. You'd rather just focus on playing your own threats rather than bouncing cards back. Befuddle also makes your Steel matchup worse, and I think Steel matchup, trying to be as good as possible into Steel, is the best bet with this one. So that's the first deck, but now we're on to the big boys. And we're starting off with a Songs deck as the 4th best deck in the game. Amber and Steel Songs. We saw this as one of the dominant decks from set 1. It has got quite a lot of improvements, but it has struggled perhaps to find a place in the metagame. I think one thing that I want to say for sure, if you're playing Amber and Steel Songs, you need to make sure that your deck is aggressive enough to be beating the Ruby Amethyst control deck before you get too late into the game. So that's why I'm really liking the look of this Rockstar Stitch version, which Empty Apartment won a Pixelborn tournament with. They've got the Rockstar Stitch package, they've got the Cinderella 3 singer, which of course can sing Let the Storm Rage On. A little bit surprised to see only 3 of these. Personally, I would be playing 4 of this card every single time, but I haven't won a Pixelborn tournament, have I? We've also got Simba in the mix here, the Lantern, which of course can ramp into your high cost cards very, very quickly, as well as the Shift Queen, a couple of Tinkerbells. Shift Queen can apply a lot of very early game pressure and board control. You're able to quest for 2 and also make some incredibly efficient trades with your cards like Cinderella being able to charge in for 5 attack onto an opponent who has likely had their attack set to 0. So that's something to look out for. Another thing which can be really good when you're playing Steel Songs, or really any deck which plays a whole new world, is trying to get your whole new world through nice and early. If you're able to empty your hand quite aggressively early on, and your opponent is got quite a lot of cards in hand, early whole new world is going to be able to discard their whole hand. You get to refill and start playing more juice yourself, juicing your Rockstar Stitch perhaps, whereas your opponent is likely to end up having to discard big cards like Be Prepared, Ursula, Elsa. That's what you're looking to achieve with a whole new world in this deck, particularly against Ruby Amethyst, singing it nice and early so that you discard their whole hand. I think this is the list which has got the most flexibility on. You can build it in a whole bunch of different ways, and I'm definitely excited to have a bit of an experiment myself with some different versions of this deck. Moving on to number 3, we have a new deck for set 2, which is Discard. Discard is focusing on the Emerald faction with cards like Bucky here, who reads, when you play a Floodborn character, each opponent chooses and discards a card. So, of course, each opponent means if you're playing with more than 2 people, both opponents, but usually when we're talking Lorcana, we're just talking about 1-on-1, so your opponent's going to discard a card. Now, you've also got Prince John, another powerhouse, who, whenever your opponent discards 1 or more cards, you draw a card for each card discarded. So your ideal curve is going to be Captain Hook on turn 1 for a bit of board presence, Bucky on turn 2, Prince John on turn 3, into a Floodborn character on turn 4, and Donald, Flynn, and Jafar all fit the bill there. They're all Floodborn characters, which means that your Bucky is going to force your opponent to discard a card, and then your Prince John is going to draw you a card. And then the objective really is just to empty their hand as much as you possibly can. Cards like Sudden Chill, Hypnotize, Lucifer are all going to help you to achieve that. Donald Duck is drawing your opponent a card, but importantly, it draws your opponent a card at the start of your turn. So you give them a card. If they accept, they don't have to, and then bang, you discard it away to draw an extra card yourself. Jafar's also interesting because it gives you a little bit more card draw yourself. I think the most controversial card in this one is Let the Storm Rage On. A lot of people aren't playing it, but I am just a huge fan of this card in general. You're getting damage to control the board and cycle your deck to find the cards that you're looking for. Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo could be included as a 2-of copy as well. There's some really weird interactions going on with this card that you should definitely be aware of. If you, let's say on turn 4, play Donald Duck, then on turn 5, you play Lucifer. When you play this character, each opponent chooses and discards either 2 cards or 1 action card. Let's say they discard their action card. Cool. And then what you do is you sing Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo with your Donald Duck, for example, and then you are able to return the Lucifer to your hand and replay the same Lucifer. Now, this seems very weird to me, and in fact, someone did this against me in a tournament, but apparently it is the rules, which is ridiculous, may I just add, but this is an interaction you need to be aware of. So the logic is I've picked the Lucifer up into my hand, and now my hand is an unknown. Like, you don't know what's in my hand, right? So I can just play the same card. The logic being is I could have 2 Lucifers in hand. You wouldn't know. So I think it's a pretty awful ruling, but one to bear in mind. So you can do that play, singing Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo to replay the card that you already played that turn. Even though it says another character with the same cost or less for free, the official ruling is that that is not the case. Not a fan of that, but worth bearing in mind. Okay, moving on to deck number 2. This could be deck number 1. This is the Meta Breaker, as I like to call it, by Aaron, who played Sapphire and Steel in Tia's recent tournament and got all the way to 2nd place, and they were so close to winning the whole thing. This deck is a menace. So what is this deck trying to do? Well, first and foremost, it's a ramp deck using Fishbone Quill. Fishbone Quill, key card here. The idea is you play Fishbone Quill on turn number 3 and you start emptying your hand. You're getting 2 ink per turn. So on turn number 4, you're already going to have 5 ink. And you want to be playing then on turn number 4 a Cogsworth or a Beast. And then on turn 6, you're looking to sing A Whole New World with one of these 2 cards, whichever you play down. The idea of this is that you're emptying your hand with Fishbone Quill. You're ramping, you're ramping, you're ramping. Of course, the big downside of Fishbone Quill is you're losing a card in hand to get an extra ink. But when you play A Whole New World, not only are you adding all those cards back into your hand, which means you can keep ramping very aggressively with Fishbone Quill, but you're also emptying your opponent's hand and putting it into the graveyard. And often, particularly against Ruby Amethyst, you're going to be seeing Elsa's, Ursula's, Be Prepared's enter their graveyard. Now, another thing that you can do with this deck, which I think is extraordinary, is this card, Nothing to Hide. Nothing to Hide, a 1-cost card. Each opponent reveals their hand and draws a card. What you can do later on in the game, if you've got access to A Whole New World, you can just have a little peek at your opponent's hand and see what's in there. If you see 3 Be Prepared and an Elsa, you're going to play your Whole New World and get rid of those. Whereas if you just see a bunch of jank, you might just continue on and decide to use your Fishbone Quill on your whole new world, and then just start using all your card draw engines. Things like Hiram Flavisham, which can draw you 2 cards. Beast can draw you cards. Nick Wild with the Popsicles can draw you cards. So really, really fascinating deck. Really impressed with how this one works. But the thing you need to bear in mind in order to beat Ruby Amethyst is you do need to be aggressively looking for Fishbone Quill, Whole New World in your mulligan phase. And as a result, you are going to end up with some hands which are going to be a little bit bricky, and you can almost like lose to yourself if you just don't draw quite correctly. The Cruella is in here to deal with the Minnie Mouse that's played in Ruby Amethyst, which is a 3 cost. You could also consider playing the Jafar, which is the same card in Steel. Overall, deck seems pretty damn good, pretty tight. You could definitely play around with a few of the ratios with this deck. For example, I would recommend playing 4 Hiram Flavishams. I think this card is just a no-brainer. I think Prince Eric is also a card which you could absolutely consider replacing. Very strong deck though. Cogsworth also very good against Steel because of its ability which gives your other characters resist. That can be incredibly good at keeping a board alive against those pesky Steel players. Okay, and the top deck, whose surprise? It's Ruby Amethyst. But I don't think this deck is quite as good as people are thinking, because like I said, I think this deck can beat it. This deck can definitely beat it. Discard can definitely beat it as well. And also I think songs can begin to be built in a way which can beat it more aggressively. And this can beat it too. Like, this definitely beats it. So while this deck is the top don for a reason, I think it's easy to overestimate quite how much of a hold it actually has over the current meta. And I think that as people begin to build their decks slightly more to beat this, we will see Ruby Amethyst become less impressive as the set goes on. This is the tournament winning deck from Tia's tournament. Big congratulations to this player, whose name has escaped me, unfortunately, but it will be in the description. My apologies to them. Pretty standard list, I have to say. A lot of them look pretty similar. The general idea is you play a 1-drop on turn 1, you bounce it back with Madam Mim on turn 2, and then you ink it later on. Then you're just playing lots of like card draw with things like Maleficent. You get the Minnie Mouse down early. The Fidget is here for the mirror to deal with your opponent's Minnie Mouses. And then you just play lots of rabbits, play lots of goats, bounce them back. Maui for control. You've got the Lady Tremaine as well, which of course can get you a whole bunch of control. Worth noting as well that the Olaf and the Minnie Mouse can be used in mirror matchups to protect you from an opponent's Lady Tremaine. If you have a Minnie Mouse on the board, then you can just decide to destroy that instead of destroying your Elsa, for example. Ursula, only 1 copy of Elsa. Teeth and Ambitions, a really nice card for dealing with your opponent's Cruellas or Jafars, the 2-cost ones, which can remove your Minnie Mouses. And you can also use Teeth and Ambitions on your Olaf, on your Minnie Mouse, before bouncing them back as well. Of course, 4 friends, 4 Be Prepared, and a couple of Sorcerer's Spellbooks. That is the Disney Lorcana Meta Report. Now, I'm not saying these are the only 5 decks in the game which can be played. However, they are by far... Certainly these 4 are the most popular, and this is my little... I'm sprinkling my aggro deck in because I think aggro is very, very underrated. But as you can see, with 3 of the top 5 decks being Steel, it's not really quite the time for aggro to shine. But when Steel is less popular in the meta, it absolutely will be. So that's the Lorcana Meta Report. Everyone's loving Ruby Amethyst control, but I think that it really is going to be time to start playing a little bit more Sapphire Steel, a little bit more Discard, and also let's try and get these song decks back into the meta by just trying to undercut those Ruby Amethyst decks and being a little bit more aggressive than they have been in the past. And I think Rockstar Stitch might prove to be the best way of doing that. Thanks so much for watching the video. If you want to see more Lorcana stuff from me, please let me know. I've been itching to do some, just been kind of waiting to rip the band-aid off, and this video seems like a great start. Hope you enjoyed it. Give it a like, subscribe for more, and hopefully I'll see you soon on some more Lorcana videos. See you later. Bye.